Hello, everyone. Welcome to Art School Live with me, Charlie Easton. I've been pinch hitting for Eric Rhodes this week. This is the last show in my week of getting to invite some of my heroes. So thank you for having me here. Today we've got a really great one to finish off my week with. We have a good friend of mine and a fabulous artist. We have Rich Gallego coming onto the show. Rich, are you here?
I am indeed, Charlie. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Rich. So what are you going to teach for us today?
Well, today I'm going to kind of go back to the roots and get kind of simple and just talk about how to pick out, in my case, I use 4 to 7 simple big shapes that, that work well together. How to get your composition. I think the title of it was Simple Shapes, Strong Composition. A lot of times people get too much in the weeds too soon, but I find that if you just get the basic shapes laid out quickly and then keep those visible throughout the painting process as you add information, you end up with a stronger composition than trying to paint every little thing that you see.
Wonderful. Well, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to hearing you elaborate on that. So without further ado, let's get the show started.
It's Art School Live with Eric Rhodes. Now, here's your host, Eric Rhodes.
Although it's not Eric Rhodes, as we all know, as I've already told you, my name's Charlie Easton. I'm guest hosting this week. If you want to see my artwork, go to charlieeaston.com or my Instagram at Charlie Easton, and you can see the kind of stuff that I do. And I live in a part of the world which has got a ton of moisture, a ton of rain. We have creeks rushing here. We have glaciers melting. We have, huge atmospheric rivers of storms coming through. And then when I look down at artists like Rich Gallego's work and I see the beautiful dry atmosphere captured in color and shape and form in a way that we don't have here, I get so excited. So I'm going to learn today with you all how to create these great environments that artists like Rich Gallego seem to make. So let's get Rich on here. Rich, you're going to talk to us, you said, about simple shapes and strong composition. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and so if I can't tell if the reference photo is up yet or not, but I'm going to basically look at a scene and then identify some simple, there it is, some big simple shapes that the composition is really comprised of. And then I'm going to talk about, how sometimes there's a need to change things just a little bit. If you've got a tree or a bush that's too symmetrical, it looks like a little puffball or something. Sometimes you get away with it. Sometimes it's better if you change the shape just slightly to make it more interesting. So we'll get into it as we go. But just to get started, I'm looking at that reference and I'm going to start. Now, what I've got here is a oil primed linen panel, and I've gone ahead and toned it just before we came on. And what I've been doing a lot lately is this reductive sort of thing where I just take some terps and I start knocking my shapes in by taking paint off. And the way I do this, you're not wasting paint, and it's easy to fix if you do something that's not quite what you want. So I'm just going to take some paint off of here and get the basic structure of these shapes. And once I have this knocked in, I'll tell you what shapes they are that I'm looking at.
Sorry, can I just confirm? You've already put down on that panel a very thin layer of paint with mineral spirits, and now you're just taking it off?
Yeah, just to get the shapes placed
right
now. And this, in case anybody's wondering, I like to use earth tones, and this is basically a mixture of transparent red earth and I believe a little bit of cadmium yellow, and it's just thinned out and put on with a paper towel. So I want to get these shapes so that they serve the painting. And by that, I mean, I don't want any of them to be too much alike. I don't want things to be too symmetrical. So like, I've got a mountain coming in from this side and one from this side, but I don't want to, even if they did come in at the same level, I would change that because I I find that it would make the composition more interesting. And another thing that I want to point out as I'm doing it is, you know, these ridges, they're curved, they're not straight. But anytime I'm painting curves, and it doesn't matter what it is that I'm painting, if it's a road or the ridge of a mountain, you see it's made with a series of straight lines that result in a curve, not some, you know, lazy little arc. And it just kind of denotes a little bit more confidence on the painter's part. It's the kind of thing where people will know what it's supposed to be, but it'll feel better, more confident if it's more structural. At least that's what I found.
Yeah, I find that all the time, and it's a tip that I give so many people, is exactly that. And I find that you can also, it's easier to draw a straight line at an angle than it is to replicate a natural curve, especially at distance.
Yeah, I agree. You spend a lot of time trying to get it, you know, right. I say with air quotes, basically. But now in the photograph, the bushes here, they're kind of round, and there's something I like to do that's, the technical term is peak shifting, where you're changing the aspect ratio, meaning you're just elongating part of it, or making something a little bit higher than it is. And what you end up with is a shape that's more interesting, that's not too symmetrical. You know, symmetry, it's an interesting thing. Apparently in the human face, the more symmetrical, the more beautiful we tend to find people. But in the landscape, symmetry just gets boring. Now, this is the thing about this reductive process. I'm putting these bushes in, the shapes that are representing the bushes, and I've got this slope, and I've got these two coming right together here, and it's forming a tangent. So right away, I know that that's got to be changed. And instead of having to go and, you know, wipe off a glob of paint that I put on there, I can just take it off here, and then I can come back in with a little bit more of that thinned out base color, and I can just go right over this. And it doesn't even matter if I take more paint off. The problem, or the point is, I want to get these two separate. I don't want this ridge line coming right to where this top of this bush is.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because when you form tangents like that, it creates interest in places where you might not really want it. The other thing I want to do before I get too far along, and there's some trees here that I'm going to pop in, but the sky. Now in the reference photo, there are clouds. I believe I think they're coming this way. I don't know. I don't remember, but I'm going to change them, because what I want is the road to lead you in this way, then you come back here, then you go up this slope, and you go up here, and I want to counter to this. So I'm going to make perhaps a more solid cloud mass that's up in opposition diagonally to this line here. And I'll just bring it right off, at least for right now. You know, I'll go back and change some of these things, but just to kind of give myself an idea, if this up here is going to be a cloud mass of some sort. Let me bring that down more. I like it down here. All right. And so this way, nobody's going through the painting too quickly, right? You're being moved this way and back here. So you're meandering back and forth. And if we design things well, we actually control where people go and when they go there and how long they linger in a particular spot. You know, it's kind of like a mind control thing, but you know, people don't realize you're doing it to them. So basically right now I've got, let's count the shapes. I've got a ground shape here, this dirt road. It's like a fire access road. There's bushes here and ground here, but the values are fairly similar. So this is 1 shape, 2 shapes, 3 shapes, 4, 5, 6 is the sky, and then the cloud mass is 7. And for me, I don't like to go, I like to keep it between 4 and 7 big simple shapes. If it's less than that, I find that it gets a little bit too boring. And if I get more than 7, you start risking things getting a bit too frenetic, too busy. So I'm going to keep it there for now. And then I'm just going to, again, by taking a little paint off, I'm going to pop in where I want some of these trees. And some of this will change as I go through the painting, but I just want to place my shapes. And I don't want to bring this shape or this tree right up where these two lines intersect. So I'm going to come off this way and maybe bring it right there. And the reason, again, I don't want to form a tangent, that keeps the eye someplace where I don't intend it to be kept. And then I have some smaller trees down here. And of course, you know, these aren't the finished products, but I'm just shorthand for where I want these things to be. And one of the things folks will notice, and I talk about this all the time, is even at this early stage, when I'm just kind of placing where objects are, I'm establishing a rhythm that's asymmetric, meaning there's a different distance between the edge of the painting and this tree, and the next one, these two here. And then maybe I've got another one back over here that's another distance away. And that rhythm is more interesting than if they were spaced equidistantly. So I'm already thinking design, even at this early stage. Okay, so, and I've got a couple more. You know what, I'll worry about that in a minute. There's a couple more of these bigger bushes over here, but I'm gonna block everything in first so we can get moving.
So are you considering the trees as shapes, or are you saying, well, I'm going to look at the landscape as a whole and see these larger masses, and then the trees are more sort of characters within that scene?
That's a good way to describe it, Charlie. If these were more voluminous trees, like if they were really huge, wide, you know, sequoias or something like that, then maybe then I would probably give them, they count them as their own separate shapes, because normally the shape is defined by a difference in value, right? And if you look at the reference, these are considerably darker than what's behind them. But for purposes today, I want to get the big shapes masked in, and these are relatively thin. They're kind of, you know, almost, I mean, it could be a telephone pole there and serve the same purpose, right?
Right.
But so I'm just going to put those, I like the way you described it, characters in the landscape. And what I want to get to now, I have a tendency to paint things darker than they need to initially, which isn't a problem. I'm painting thinly right now, and I'm just blocking in the shapes. You know, I've told people so many times that every painting I've done looks terrible at some point, and it's not done, you know. All I'm doing is getting things organized at this point. And of course, my goal ultimately is I want to get all my shapes blocked in, and then I'll get the values, you know, relating properly, which is of paramount importance. And then as I go through the painting, I'm adding information to all the different shapes. And at the end of the piece, I still want those initial shapes to be recognizable. You know, you don't want to break them up too much with dappled light or whatever. You can use some, but you don't want to destroy the shape. So at the end, you know, it'll look a lot more like what it's supposed to be, but you'll still be able to see those initial shapes. And by the way, folks, this is something that I do whether I'm in my studio or I'm out plein air painting. I try to keep the processes pretty close. It's just easier for me that way if I don't have to, you know, shift gears so much. And so, you know, again, this is a thin layer of paint, and ultimately I'll go back into it and I'll lighten it where I need to. I'll darken it if there's some, you know, crevice or something that needs to be painted. And I'll just put more information, you know, I'll neutralize things, whatever. This is the initial layer.
And that blue that you're putting on there is picking up a little bit of the orange, or the burnt sienna that's underneath?
Well, I mean, it results in an orangey color, and yeah, it is, because I don't usually prime, well, I don't ever tone my canvases in advance. I always do it when I start painting, so it's still a bit wet, and some of that will get mixed in, which I don't mind because it's a complement of the blue, and I don't want the blue to end up, you know, so chromatic that I call them Disneyland colors.
Right.
I want it to feel, you know, more organic than that. So I don't mind it picking up some of that orange. I may go back and even add still more orange to it at some point. But right now, I want to get this this other hill blocked in real quickly. And again, if it seems too dark, that's not a problem, because as you guys paint with oils know, it's easier to come back in and lighten the color. Easier to do that than it is to darken something that you painted too light.
Good questions just come in here, Rich, if you don't mind me asking.
Sure.
So you talked about having this kind of rule of thumb that you kind of like sort of 7 shapes within your scene. Any more, it becomes a bit too frenetic, and any less, it's not that interesting. Does that rule of thumb kind of apply no matter what size of panel you're working on?
That is a good question. I use the same rule, and what it is no more than 7, no fewer than 4.
Okay.
And now, like anything, there are exceptions to the rule, but yeah, I do the same thing whether it's a large panel or a small panel. Now, the difference is, when I'm painting these, it may start out like that. Well, it will start out like that, but the larger the piece is, the more area you have to, make interesting. And so I will go back in after I've established the basic composition and maybe add, like, I'm going to put a couple more bushes up here that stand out, but I can parse those out after I've blocked it in.
Right.
And the underlying structure will still hold up.
Right.
With those initial shapes. So this is just a hill in the background, and it's going to be warmer than the one further back, obviously. And what I find, especially painting in plein air, is, everybody knows that the light, it changes and shifts fairly quickly. And so I want to be able to get this stuff knocked in pretty quickly before I'm trying to remember what it looked like, And the thing is, if you get this in, you get your initial shapes and then your light and shadow pattern, you get that blocked in fairly quick. You can kind of take your time because, you say, well, this bush over here, it was in sunshine, and now it's in shadow, and I don't know what color it is. Well, there's other stuff around there that's, it's the same material, and maybe that's in sunlight now. And you can always find something to use as a reference, but you got to get the big shapes in initially. And I see this is a bit more green than I want, so I'm trying to warm that up a bit. I see people all the time that, and it's not I'm not chastising. I'm just saying you don't know until you do it. I see people go out all the time and they're spending way too much time trying to do some perfect drawing. And, that's fine in the studio, I suppose, but when you're outdoors and things are changing quickly, you kind of have to have a way to simplify things and knock those big shapes in.
Mm-hmm. But I'm assuming you're still trying to be accurate with the angularity and the value of those shapes that you're putting in. You're just saying once you've got those landmarks in, you're in good shape.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to be accurate with the angles so long as they serve the painting well. There are times when I'll have to change something, like I did with the cloud mask there, right?
Right.
We do have to take control of our scene and make it what we want it to be. As far as the values, I will go through once I get things blocked in, and when I start adding more information to each of the shapes, the thing that's constantly on my mind at that point is making sure that the value of one shape relates accurately to the value of the one next to it. We've all heard that admonition that color gets all the credit and value does all the work. That is probably one of the truer things I've ever heard. And it doesn't matter if you're painting in a high key or low key or middle key. If the relationship of the values isn't accurate, you're going to have a hard time making it work.
Right.
So, and again, this is all very early. This is rudimentary work. I'm trying to get the canvas covered. And I am paying attention to values, but I will go back and zero in on it and be even more careful. Like this stuff up here needs to get lighter. The other thing is, everybody's got different approaches. I know people that start with their focal point and work outwards. I know people that work from the background to foreground. And I'm not going to tell anybody that their way of doing is is wrong.
Right.
I am going to say, figure out how your brain works and what works best for you. But for me, the idea of, blocking things in, and then, once the blocking's done, I'll go to another shape. And I usually won't spend more than a few minutes on it before moving on to something next to it. And I'll keep going around shape by shape and adding information. And that way I can compare one shape to the shapes next to it and see if they're relating properly. And I'll just keep doing that, revisiting until I get everything down the way I want it. I find that if I do it a different way, if say background to foreground, whatever part of the painting I happen to be working on, that is my focal point at that moment. But it doesn't mean I want that to be the focal point for the painting.
Right.
So if I put so much information in the sky or this cloud, because it's what I'm working on for 20 minutes, then I move down and do the same thing here and here and here. That's how you get photographic looking paintings. But that's not the way we observe the world. When we look at something, whatever we're focused on is in, sharp definition, sharp relief, and the periphery is much less so. So what I want to do is get all my shapes down, add information, and then I'll keep going around and around, and I'll say, all right, I need to get a little less chroma on the periphery. I need to soften edges here or there. And then I want stronger edges, higher contrast, that sort of thing near my focal area. And I can only do that if I can compare one shape to the one next to it. And like, I can't compare this to this yet because there's nothing here.
Right.
So for me, it makes more sense to work all over the canvas and just keep coming back and adding more information as I go.
And have you conceived of the focal area for this painting yet, or does it emerge?
No, that's a good question. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it does emerge. For this one, and then there's the question of, in my mind, sometimes I'll have a focal point that's not an object, but it's a spot where two objects meet, or sometimes it's a mood, sometimes it's texture. In this case, what I want to do is take people on a journey through here, and eventually I'm probably going to have them, maybe this tree over here, I'll put a bit more light here, so that's the one. They'll come this way, go up here,
right,
come back in here. And that's another thing that I'll do when I think a painting is close to finished. I'll sit and diagram it, and I'll just do like a little pencil sketch of it, and I'll literally put little arrows on it where the eye is supposed to go and see if it's working. It's just something that I find helps me figure that stuff out. Block in some of the sky here before we go too much further. And again, I don't know that I'll finish this in the time that we have, but I want people to get the idea that, what the process is, what the approach is that I'm using. And I tell people all the time, there's a lot of ways to paint a landscape. I'm going to show you what I do, and if you think that my work works, then maybe give some of this stuff a try.
And buy your video.
And buy my video.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Which
Charlie.
Actually, I think I just saw somebody put a promo code for it in the chat. So, and I can see on the right of your panel there's a very small snapshot of it. Awesome gold, Rich Gallego, and it's I mean, what a beautiful painting of a tree on the front cover. I'm assuming that's one that you do in the video.
Yeah, that's the one. That piece actually, it started as a 12 by 12 plein air piece, and there's now a 48 by 48 version of it with an amazing one-of-a-kind handmade black walnut frame.
Oh wow!
And
hang on,
so if that's too small,
it's not a black walnut tree, is it?
No, it's a sycamore. And that's the video
that
right
would be
there,
that would be kind of sick, wouldn't it? Like chop down the tree to make the frame for the painting of the tree.
Oh yeah, no, I don't. I think the plein air world might have my head if I did something like that. Rightfully so. So
yeah, there you go. Well, it's a beautiful painting, and I tell you, one of the things I love about that painting is it is a very strong shape-driven painting, and I can see from the way that you're laying out this scene in front of us here that you're thinking about strong shapes in all of your work.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually a really astute observation. I tell people all the time that I know people who are driven by color. I know people who are driven by texture, or they just like certain things. They like horses. They like.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be, if I'm driving along looking for something to paint, more often than not, the thing that gets my attention is interesting shapes.
Yeah.
And the color is really of secondary importance, if not tertiary. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that I'm basically shape driven. And who knows how that ends up happening,
Yeah, I mean, it was for me anyway. I mean, I know this isn't about me, but I mean, I know that for me, the two biggest developments in my art were firstly mixing in terms of temperature rather than in terms of pigment, and secondly painting shape instead of line.
Yeah,
and I know that both of those concepts for people who are starting out can seem quite intimidating, but what you're doing here, Rich, is you're really showing us how, basically identifying shapes early in your scene actually gives you a lot of freedom. It means that you don't have to be worrying about all these trillions of different details in that far hillside.
Yeah.
You've just painted essentially a third of the panel in one modulated color.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's well, first of all, before I go into anything too much, I want to tell people I've seen Charlie's work on online, and it's impressive. But I got to meet Charlie for the first time in person at the recent convention, and I got to see his work in person. And let me tell you, it's a lot more impressive when you see it in person. It is. I just I'm not blowing smoke at you, Charlie. I just was very impressed.
Oh, thank you, Rich.
So,
I appreciate it.
So go check his work out too. But yeah, you're right. As far as I tell people that you can sit and try to paint every twig or every rock or whatever, and you think that you're getting it, done well because it's got everything included. But there's a difference between simple and simplistic. Right. And to my mind, simplistic is when you don't bother to edit out the extraneous that doesn't support the narrative of the painting. Simple is when you take the time to get rid of those things that aren't helpful, that aren't helping the narrative, and you end up with a more powerful painting when you use the approach of simplifying, of editing out the extraneous. Okay, I'm going to move. So I've got this block, bit of the sky. Again, I'm going to come back into all of these shapes and add more information. I want to get down in here and get some of this canvas covered. And folks that are watching, please feel free to ask whatever questions you want to ask, because I'm completely comfortable painting and talking at the same time.
Good stuff.
There are some people who say I would do that too much. So, well, it's interesting. When I first started, well, to me it is anyway. When I first started plein air painting, I would seek out places where there was very little foot traffic, and people couldn't see what I was doing because I didn't really know what I was doing. And as you go along, you realize that most people are just impressed that you can set up an easel, and in my experience, people who have come along while I was outdoors painting, they're usually pretty generous, pretty kind, and so yeah, I'm totally fine talking while I paint. Was that your experience as well, Charlie? Was it something that you had to kind of get used to? And
what, people were talking to me?
Yeah.
It depends. Like sometimes you have some of the best conversations when you're out painting and talking to people about the art, and you realize things. And sometimes this happens with teaching as well. When you're teaching, you realize why you're doing something that you're doing intuitively. So it's quite good to sort of academicize, is that even a word? Like turn what the ethereal into academic. So I do quite enjoy conversations from that perspective, but also you can certainly have some of the most crazy conversations, like people walking up to you and going, "Did you paint that?" as you are actively painting on a panel.
I've had that too. You're standing there with a paintbrush in your hand. You're making marks.
You're like, no, I just painted on somebody else's painting. I mean, what's going on?
And then there's one of my favorites. There's everybody has people that walk up to them and they'll tell you, there's even T-shirts that address it. Oh, my aunt is a painter. My grandfather's a painter. And I had a lady do that while I was teaching a class here locally once at a local lake. She comes walking around along the shore and walks up to me and says hello. And, and I'm always polite to people and try to be kind to them. You never know when, first of all, it's just a decent thing to do in my opinion. But second, you never know when somebody's going to become a student or a patron. So I try to be kind. So she came up and said, "Oh, my grandfather was a painter." And in my head, I'm going, "Oh, okay, here we go." I said, "Well, is that so?" And she starts talking and, talking about his work. And then she says, "You may have heard of him." Okay. What was his name? Granville Redmond. I'm like, yeah, I think I may have heard of him. So that one caught me off guard.
Yeah, right. That is it.
Yeah.
So this is looking beautiful. Yeah. For everyone watching, including myself, like it's very obvious the shapes that you're piecing together here, almost like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
Or I maybe should say like a mosaic, and then the manipulation will happen over time.
Yeah, exactly. Like I've got some darker trees that are, smaller pines back here, and I'm just making, shapes that are somewhat reminiscent of pine trees back here. The important thing is that I get a value and a temperature at this point. This is further back, so it's cooler than the stuff here. Yeah. Right. So, and it doesn't mean that adjustments won't occur, but again, you got to get the canvas covered.
A question just on color. Somebody said, does the intense color of the wall behind you impact your painting, or is that why you've got the cardboard to separate it from the wall?
Yeah, again, very astute. I don't think it really has much of an effect, but sometimes you get so used to things you don't realize. So just to make sure, I like to have the neutral cardboard behind, just to break up that, I don't want that wall color right up against the painting. Yeah, so you find different little tricks that work, which is why I say, this is the way that I do it, and if it's something that I think it's something that will benefit other people, especially if they're sort of early in their journey here of learning to do this. But it's by no means the only way to do this. I remember having a discussion with 𝗦𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗀 once. We were out in the 𝗦𝗵𝗇𝗺𝗫𝗀𝗀𝗀 National Forest in Wyoming painting, and she asked me something about one of her paintings that she wasn't happy with, and I said, "Well, you've done this and you've done that," and I pointed out some rule of painting that she had violated, and that turned into a discussion of whether there are rules or there are no rules. And it occurred to me that we're both right. There are rules but they're more guidelines. There are things that work and that don't work, and it kind of depends on who you are as a painter as well. Some people are much more comfortable just kind of saying, the rules be damned, I'm going to do what I want. Yeah. And, I come from a scientific background, so I'm used to having protocols and that sort of thing. And it serves me well, but it doesn't mean it'll do that for somebody else. You kind of have to know who you are.
So just so you know, Rich, we've got about maybe 10, 15 minutes left.
Okay, that's fine. And like I said, I didn't expect that I'd finish, but I think people can hopefully see that it's starting to turn into something here. And this is a 16 by 20, in case anybody's was wondering that. And it's a little hard to do a 16 by 20 in, an hour or whatever, but the point is to get some of the concepts across and hope that they're going to be useful to people. This area that I'm doing the painting of is called Bobcat Canyon. It's in the San Gabriel National Forest, which is it's about a half an hour from where I live. All right, let me get some of these greens in here so these don't look like these little ghostly apparitions.
Yeah, they've got a nice kind of soft quality on the edge of them, though. They're kind of like a glow.
Yeah, Well, I might, in where the light sides are, I might keep some of that, you know, the transition from the dark to the light.
Right.
Sometimes people will ask when I'm doing demos like this, they'll notice that there's a separation between the shapes where I leave the underpainting, the tone part, and they'll ask, you know, is that by design? And it in fact is while I'm painting, but eventually I'll bring all these things together. But there are times when the warmth that you have here actually serves the painting well, so I might, you know, leave some of it there.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the painting does let you know what it needs as you move through it.
And often that's just experience, right? Isn't it? Like sometimes you try something, it works once, and then it becomes part of your toolkit.
Yeah, that's true. And then what I found for me is that the challenge then is not to overuse it where it becomes, you know, trite and
Right.
formulaic, you know.
Yeah.
And in fact, you know, roads like this are one of those things I try not to, you know, put a pathway or a road in every painting that I do, because it just becomes a crutch, you know.
Yeah, I mean they're very, very useful tools to get you through a landscape, of course, quite literally and metaphorically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, again, composition and design are so closely linked that you really can't. Well, you can, but it's difficult to talk about one without the other. And when I'm putting my shapes together, I'm always thinking about design as well, and how am I going to lead the eye through the painting, and how am I going to keep it from exiting one side or the other when I want to keep the viewer within the confines of the piece. And for those of you who paint pine trees by making a triangle and trying to make it look like last year's Christmas tree, sometimes they look that way, but I find more often than not they're a bit more random than that. So you'll see me applying paint where I'm twisting the brush, and I'm using the side of the brush and the tip of the brush and all kinds of stuff. I find that it helps me get a more organic feel to the finished product.
Mm-hmm.
I would also encourage everybody, if you don't do this or haven't done this, especially those of you who are relative beginners, get a piece of cardboard, something you don't care about, and take the brushes that you have and try to make every single mark that you can, all the different varieties of marks, because these things are really, really versatile tools, and you really don't need, you know, 15 brushes for one painting. I frequently, what is this? This is a number 8. It was a number 8 long flat. It is now a short filbert. and I, you know, I might switch up toward the end and use something with a little bit, you know, more square edge, but it's not unusual for me to do the whole painting with one brush. You got to know how to use it, what it can do. And I would encourage people to explore that, because, you know, the more arrows you have in your quiver, so to speak, the better off you're going to be. It's like, you know, last year I started doing some portraiture, and I had a few people ask, "Oh, are you going to start being a portrait painter now?" I'm like, well, I don't know. I'll probably do more of them, but the reason I did it was because if I don't do portraits, I want it to be because I choose not to, not because I can't do it. Right. So it's kind of the same thing with figuring out how your materials and your tools work. And as far as I'm concerned, I just want to be able to explore what everything can do. What are the possibilities? And again, I will come back before this thing is finished and tighten some of this up, but I just want to get some light here so that there's form to these. And we've got that light hitting these. It's probably got to be a little bit desaturated. Now I might make, you know, very direct strokes like this for the halo effect on this massive foliage, but I'll go back into it later and adjust those strokes so that they look believable. And sometimes just by using the edge to do something like that.
Right.
but they start to have, you know, volume and form once you start putting the light and the shadow on there. And I've got to get some ground cover over here.
But yeah, this the painting has been reading well ever since he put in the first
good
edges of the shapes. You know, it's like that's what you're doing, and I appreciate the demo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charlie. You know, it's always it's one of the, to me, it's one of the fascinating and beautiful things about painting in general is, you know, so many of us have such different approaches to things. You know, most of which work really well. It just depends on who you are and you know, whether you've mastered your technique or not. Or and I have the people that say, "Oh, I can't draw a straight line, or I can't draw a stick figure." And, well, you don't see a whole lot of straight lines or stick figures in my work, so that's not really a prerequisite. Go ahead and give it a try. You know. I'm going to get up here. This cloud up here, I want it to have some shadow. And I'm going to switch brushes now, but only because it'll take me longer to clean that paint out and get what I want than it will just put a new brush in play. How's the weather been up where you are?
Oh, you know, we're getting into summer, so it's good. Yeah, no, it's been pretty nice, and it's definitely plein air season because you still got snow on the peaks.
Oh wow!
And you've got a bit of a good bit of sunshine around. So and then of course the rivers and the creeks are running hard right now because you've got the snowpack melting. So yeah, it's good time to be out. I'm going up into the Rockies, up to Banff and Jasper in the next couple of weeks. So
oh, you're killing me.
Yeah, it should be good.
Good for you, man. I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I saw on your website, Rich, that you call painting your wonderful affliction, painting the natural world, and it feels sometimes like when I'm out that it is an affliction, and other times it feels such a joy and such a blessing to be out and painting.
Yeah, well, I call it an affliction because it's something that I have no control over in the sense that I have to do it.
Right.
You know, when my wife and I got married, at one point she made the mistake of referring to painting and my you know, taking part in that activity as my hobby. And I sat her down and I literally said, don't ever call it a hobby. You have to understand this. I need to eat. I need to sleep. I need to paint.
Right.
If you try to make me stop painting, she interrupted. She said, what, you'll leave me? And I said, no, I won't leave you. Worse, I'll stay with you and you'll be miserable. Yeah. So yeah, I have to do it, but it is wonderful. I really don't understand. I mean, you know, intellectually I get it, but there's a part of me that doesn't understand why everybody doesn't want to do this. And it's because, Charlie, I get so much joy and such a benefit out of doing this in my life. And people don't realize sometimes it's much more than smearing paint on a canvas. You end up appreciating the natural world in ways that you wouldn't if you weren't painting it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got to look at a tree. If you're driving, you say, well, it's a brown thing with green leaves. Don't drive my car into it. That's pretty much it. Survival instinct, right? But if you got to paint it, you're going to see all the different values and temperature shifts and positive and negative shapes. And so you're literally, you start to appreciate the natural world on a deeper level. And I think that's the gift that we get.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So we just got a couple more minutes here, Rich.
All right. No worries. You can tell me to drop the brush anytime.
Oh, no, well, I can sit here and watch you paint all day.
Yeah. That's a funny thing too, isn't it? The old expression is like watching paint dry, and I go, I like watching paint dry.
Yeah, right. Well, for the rest of you, if you like watching Rich's paint dry, then there is a discount code on his DVD right now. So giving you the plugs here, Rich. Autumn Gold, Rich Gallego. I think somebody's posted a link in this chat, but it's yeah, I could keep watching this.
Well, that's why I was so happy that I got to see you working on the big pieces at the convention, to actually watch. You know, you don't, and I would do it the same way, but you don't paint from the wrist. You know, your whole body was involved in moving paint around on that big canvas, and it was really fun to watch.
Yeah, that's, oh, thank you. I mean, I do enjoy painting large for that reason. It's like, it is a more of a gestural, especially when you get some of these landscapes that feel like they move you, and that they're encouraging you to look up, or your arms start to move and you're like, whoa, look at the size of that peak. Then, you know, you want to have a bit of that movement in your brush marks, and I think it makes for interesting paintings.
Yeah, I agree. I had a teacher at the Art Center School of Design in Pasadena here in California, who the first time I met him, he was saying to me, why are you painting from the wrist? Why are you making these little tiny movements? You're a big physical guy. Be sculptural, paint from the shoulder, get physical with it. And it was so freeing. It made it so much more enjoyable. I never forgot that. And so when I saw you painting there, I'm like, oh yeah, Mark Strickland would be proud.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, it was cool actually, because you know, there are a lot of people at the convention who are doing smaller works and doing beautiful smaller works. Don't get me wrong. And it was, I think there is something just about the scale, especially when you go to an environment like Lake Tahoe and you have these huge vistas and you've got the peaks and you've got the open expanse. Sometimes it's worth pulling out a big canvas, and I would encourage anyone watching, you know, if you're getting stuck in your art practice, try something different. And if you're painting small and getting stuck, we'll try painting something big. If you're painting big and you get stuck, we'll try painting something small. Just change it up, change medium, change anything, and you'll realize through doing that the bits that you like in your previous practice and the bits that you need to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I tell people, you know, even read something that challenges your brain, you know, watch a lecture that's on a topic you don't understand. And the reason I tell them that is because I feel like if you can scratch that, it doesn't matter how I feel. I think from experience that if you challenge your brain on a continual basis, it remains more elasticized. And what happens is you start seeing possibilities for this competition or composition or that one that you didn't see before, because your brain is just more active now.
Yeah.
And I found that to be true personally. When people ask me, you know, people are very kind sometimes. Rich, how can I get as good as you? And then they're a little taken aback when I say, well, you know, read Immanuel Kant's treatise on beauty and aesthetic, or you know, read Darwin's Origin of Species. And it's not about whether you agree with it or not. It's challenging your brain and keeping it active so that you'll see, you know, opportunities that you might not have seen before.
Yeah. And just getting back to the shape demo that you're doing right now, what I can see is that background shape is still holding together really well, but you're modulating, you're putting darker, warmer color lower down, and then it's fading to lighter and cooler up towards the horizon,
up toward the ridge,
up towards
because you got to give volume. So you put them on flat, you mentioned it earlier, like puzzle pieces or mosaic pieces, and then as you start building the painting, now I got to start thinking three-dimensionally, and what can I do to bring the base of this mountain forward and push the ridge back so that it has volume, right?
Yeah.
And that it's by adding warmth, and I'm also neutralizing the color a little bit, but less so up here because it's going to be this ridge is farther away than the base of the mountain is. Right. So you're building that kind of stuff up. And I'll do the same thing here eventually, not quite as much because it is closer. But all of these shapes, you know, you go through and you start fixing it. The last thing I usually do, and I'll skip to that right now just because of time constraints. The last thing I usually do is go through and start, you know, dealing with edge quality. And because you don't want just a dark and then a hard line and light, it doesn't feel natural at all. So if my focal area is going to be in here, one of the things that I'll probably do is get some big thick paint and say, well, there's a nice bit of light right here. in
Right.
here, and there'll be some light here and here, but it won't be enough to compete with this exactly. And so I want to lead people through here and have them come over here. And then I got to find a way to maybe I'll put some light on this, bringing it down, because ideally I'd have them move around the painting and then come back to the starting point and start the journey all over again.
Nice.
You know.
Well, Rich, I think we're going to have to probably pause there, but I really appreciate it. I think your insight, the conversation, and the painting that you've done. I think everyone has got a lot out of this. Just a reminder to everyone to go and check out Rich's website, which is 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 Gallego. And thanks again, Rich. Really appreciate you doing this for us today. Rich's work is so evocative of these beautiful dry landscapes. I'm gonna go and paint a creek today, so I'll be thinking of you in a completely different environment. Now, everyone, stick around. We've got a message from our fearless leader, Eric, who is traveling around the world right now. I've just got a couple of things to mention for you. We've got a gift. We've got the free ebook. We've got 201 essential plein air painting tips. That's pleinairmagazine.com/ebook. If you haven't signed up for Gouache Live, it's time to do that. Tickets are $47 each, and that's on August 23rd, 2025. You've got tons of great people instructing on that one. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel at Art School Live and at Eric Rhodes on Instagram. I said we were going to have a message from Eric. You know what? I'm not sure that we do actually today, but do go onto his Instagram because he's posting. I think he posted today about making paper in China, which is pretty cool. So anyway, thanks again to Rich. Really great demo. Thanks to all my guests this week. Thank you to you for having me in your homes or studios this week. And I hope that you've got something out of it. I certainly have. I feel refreshed and rejuvenated. I'm going to be going at my canvases now with all sorts of good tips. So thanks very much for tuning in. And if you want to hear more from me, I think I'm going to be next on Acrylic Live, which is, I think, almost a year away. But if I don't see you before then, thanks for tuning in.